Hello, I'm Jim Kavanagh, known online also as the Polemicist. You can find all my work at my Substack, Jim Kavanagh's Substack, and you can follow me on X, Twitter, at thepolemicist_. All the links are below, including links to today's video. Thank you, and please enjoy today's video. Quicker and more thoroughly than I foresaw, the Trump administration, through Elon Musk and his Doge crew, has embarked on an aggressive campaign that has opened up and disrupted many federal programs. Some of those, like USAID, we on the left have always criticized. Others we want to protect. Here, today, what I want to do is get beneath the details of the various programs Musk is targeting and focus on Musk's underlying main objective, and that is to cut government spending, driven by his fundamental conviction that the enormous national debt will bankrupt the country, as his tweet here shows. Musk is not the first and not alone in perceiving this threat. He shares that perception with every Republican and Democratic president since at least Reagan, all of whom also proposed and propose spending cuts as a solution. Some of whom, like Bill Clinton, did carry out massive cuts in the federal workforce for that reason. Let's not fall for the line that this is about, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse. Per Musk's tweet, which says nothing about that, it's about spending per se. For him and everyone in his paradigm, federal spending is inherently a problem that needs to be solved by balancing the books. Within that paradigm, it is necessary to go after core social programs like Social Security and Medicare, which are massive expenditures, as has been repeatedly explained by one of the staunchest spokesmen for the paradigm, Joe Biden. Waste, fraud, and abuse are always the excuses to get popular support for socially suicidal cuts because they cost too much. What's new is that Musk, Trump, and the Republicans, now in complete control of the federal government, are, in an unprecedented and disruptive way, going chainsaw on the spending cut program, zero-based budgeting and all. The huge problem that I want to address is that most Americans, including, unfortunately, most people on the left, share Musk's framework of thought, in which the national debt poses an existential bankrupting threat to the country. I'll restate that for emphasis. Most leftists, and I mean beyond Democratic-aligned liberals, whom I don't consider leftists, most leftists share Elon Musk's fundamental framework of thought regarding the problem of debt and deficit in the United States monetary system. Except most people on the left, thinking within that framework, propose raising taxes to solve the problem. If that doesn't change, if people, led by leftists, I would hope, do not come to understand the fallacy of and reject the whole debt fear-mongering framework and all of its presumptions, including the fallacious assumption about the purpose of taxes, there will be no effective resistance to the Musk-Doge austerity agenda. And he will succeed in throwing millions out of work, undermining even Social Security and Medicare, creating a massive recession, if not depression, and further demolishing the social lives of millions of Americans and making new social programs impossible. I plead with everyone, especially my friends on the left, to understand that the whole framework here is wrong, obviously and consequentially wrong. And if you continue to speak in that framework, you will fail. There is no problem here that can be solved by spending cuts or tax increases. The problem is not whether to cut spending and or to raise taxes to pay the government's debt. The problem is thinking that the government's debt is anything like an individual's and that spending or taxes has anything to do with solving it. And everybody who continues to promote that framework, whether they know it or not, is part of the problem and an ally and enabler of the Trump-Musk-Doge austerity agenda. Let's consider the fundamental elements of the monetary system we now have. This is not a matter of some suggested socialist, Marxist, or libertarian, or Trumpist program. This is how the actually existing fiat monetary system works. If you don't like that system and want to suggest another one, go right ahead. But first of all, understand how that system works. The fundamental fact of that system, from which all else follows, is that in our fiat monetary system, the federal government, via congressional spending appropriations, creates money at will. That's what fiat means. A lot of people will say that they acknowledge that, but they don't follow through or accept all its implications. And we have to get over that. We have to thoroughly understand and explain all the implications of that, or we're going to be in the household like an individual framework that Musk et al. Want us in. The first conclusion to understand is that taxes do not pay for federal government programs. If you don't understand that and don't stop talking as if taxes pay for federal government programs, you have not understood our fiat monetary system. The federal government is precisely unlike an individual or household or business because, unlike them, it creates money. Unlike all those entities, the source of the money for federal government spending is not something exogenous, not taxes or debt or any revenue collected from outside the government. The federal government does not collect revenue. It creates money. If you don't understand that and don't stop talking as if the federal government needs revenue to pay for things, you have not understood our fiat monetary system. The source of federal government spending is a decision by Congress to spend money into existence, to create money by authorizing spending on specific projects. Look here at what Margaret Thatcher said. This is the framework that we have to reject. She is wrong. There is no such thing as taxpayer money or tax dollars. US dollars are not conjured up in taxpayers' pockets. Every non-interest burdened dollar in the American economy, in Elon Musk's, mine, and your pockets, came from a political decision of the United States Congress. Money is a social tool created to facilitate the production and distribution of real values and resources. It is a social thing at its inception and all the way through. When you trace money back to its origin, you do not arrive at a private individual taxpayer. You arrive at a public political authority that decided to create it. The social nature of money is precisely what terms like taxpayer money prevent you from seeing. Contrary to Margaret Thatcher and Elon Musk, and everyone who accepts that paradigm, including leftists, it's public money, not taxpayer money. And really, we have to stop saying that. Really, every time you use the word taxpayer money or taxpayer dollars, you are helping Elon Musk, his and Thatcher's and every capitalist politician's austerity agenda. Though it only ever creates and spends a finite amount of money for specific purposes, the federal government can create and spend any amount of money it wants for whatever the Congress of the United States wants, from tanks to healthcare, without drawing on taxes. Taxing and spending are parallel but separate activities. Here's the two parallel but separate things that are going on and how they're misrepresented. One, the managers of the monetary system, create a column in a spreadsheet labeled taxes collected. Two, they create another column in the spreadsheet in which they record expenditures. Then they say the total number in column 2 must not exceed the number in column 1. And furthermore, that the number in column 2 comes from column 1. It's a fiction, a pretext. The numbers in column 2, which record money created by federal government spending, do not and cannot derive from or depend on the number in column 1, which records how much of that previously created money was later retrieved. It's the reverse of what they want you to think and what Thatcher wants you to think. Column 2, taxes, follow and are derived from the spending number in column 1. Spending precedes and provides the money for taxation. Taxes are a result, not a source of spending. It's not tax and spend, it's spend then tax. Spending creates money. Taxes destroy it. Spending creates money and sends it as an interest-free loan into the economy. Taxes retrieve some of that money from the economy and cancel it, turning a -1 in the ledger into a 0. The money-creating federal government does not need or use the zeros. Then, elaborating on this fiction, the purveyors of the false paradigm then say that if column 1, taxes retrieved, totals less than column 2, expenditures, that's a deficit, which the government must borrow money to close to balance the books. Borrow here means selling treasury securities, which means moving money already created from what is essentially a country's or wealthy individual's checking account at the Fed to what is essentially a deferred access interest-paying CD account. This whole rigmarole makes it seem like there's a relation between the money in those treasury securities and government spending that there is not. The so-called borrowed money in those treasury securities, dollars that were already in circulation, just sits there. It is not used to pay for government programs or anything else. The entire principle of that borrowed money exists and can be repaid instantly by moving it back into the checking accounts. The only new money is the interest promised, which is indeed a lot and totally unnecessary. The problem is not, as Musk thinks, that the interest on the debt is going to absorb all tax revenue. That interest, like everything else, won't be paid from tax revenue, but from newly created money. The problem is that that interest is public money gifted to wealthy actors for no other reason than to pay them for not spending some of that money for some specified period. This whole exercise has nothing to do with tax revenue and does not provide revenue for spending. Its purpose is not to collect revenue to spend, but to offset inflation, which it only defers and increases via future interest payments. I repeat, the only reason to sell treasury bonds is to reduce potentially inflationary spending for a while, and the inevitable result is to increase inflationary pressure later. All of this is nothing like what an individual, you, I, or a business or a household does when it borrows on a credit card. This whole rigmarole is meant to make you think that there is some necessary relation between borrowing and spending and that something burdensome is going on, to make you buy into the fiction. As James K. Galbraith, the economist, sums it up quite well. Could the Treasury skip the rigmarole and pay its bills without bonds? Economically, sure. Why doesn't it? Well, the Fed has regulations governing overdrafts. But apart from these, the answer is plain. To do so would expose the public debt as a fiction and the debt ceiling as a sham. And we're going to have a fight over the debt ceiling again. If Elon Musk is worried about inflation and the enormous interest payments we're facing on selling those treasury securities, he should advocate to stop the fiction of selling treasury bonds to make up for the deficit. Let the deficit be. The columns in the spreadsheet do not have to match. The federal government, unlike an individual, a business, or a state, does not need and should not, by default, balance its books. The spreadsheet can be in deficit forever. And that's what the national debt is. Musk and all like-minded centrists, rightists, and leftists who share the assumption that running a federal deficit is by default a bad thing that must be corrected have it backwards. Deficits are by default necessary and beneficial. It would be ridiculous for the money-creating federal government to take back all the money it had created and spent into the economy every year. If there's actually an inflationary mismatch between the amount of money in the economy and the amount of real resources in the real economy, not between spreadsheet columns, but between money and real resources, the money retrieving federal government, the federal government which has the power to retrieve as well as to create money, can always take some back, can always take some out with taxes by taxing those who have too much of it, not by giving them even more money not to spend something for a while. That, to control inflation, not to provide revenue, is a central purpose of taxation. There's another important purpose of spending in our contemporary American economy that has to do with the problems of late capitalism. It employs a lot of people. Though it escapes the genius of Elon Musk, that is an end in itself, a necessary and beneficial objective. In our late capitalist economy, the private sector is a playground for profit maximization via financial speculation, increasingly dominated by financial gains rather than industrial production. And it cannot employ enough of the workforce in jobs that provide a decent living to keep the society and the economy stable. It is certainly the case, as Musk thinks he's so smart to figure out, that there are more government employees than there have to be. And if he fires a quarter or a half of the 2.4 million federal employees because they are not needed, well, where will they go where they are needed? The private sector does not and cannot employ them, certainly not with jobs that have salaries, benefits, and job security that support a decent family. Those jobs do not exist anymore in the private sector in the new gig economy. We hear all the laid off FBI and FAA employees who thought they had nice PMC lives saying, we've lost our salaries and medical benefits. We can't pay our mortgages or car payments. Now add in all the recipients of federal research grants and all the companies, like SpaceX, but they're not going to get cut. Now add in all the recipients of federal research grants and all the companies receiving federal contracts. Sure, there are more of them than there have to be. And you've got millions of people who have lost the middle-class life they thought they had achieved. You've got an increasingly sick, homeless, and infuriated populace, a collapse in demand for whatever private sector commodity producers still exist, and a Great Depression. And for what? So that the money-creating federal government can refrain from creating some money it doesn't need, but people do? Job creation is not a loss for the federal government or a cost to taxpayers. It is a necessary activity of the federal government, necessary to build and maintain a society for the benefit of all, which the late capitalist private sector cannot do. The federal government has implicitly and partially taken on the role of employer of last resort and should establish an explicit job guarantee, should take on that role explicitly. Any smart capitalist should agree to that. Too bad Elon Musk isn't so smart. Let's also realize that all those federal workers, grant recipients et al., whom Musk and Doge fired in order to save the government from creating some money it doesn't need, will have to turn to private banks to get another kind of money, the kind that has to be paid back fully with interest. That's why the bankers want the government to cut spending and you to think that the government should. There's a tendentially inverse relation between government spending and private debt. They want to fearmonger you about the former, government spending and government debt, when it's the latter that screws you, private debt. Musk et al. Show you scary charts about the rise in government debt and the number of federal employees, when, as everyone knows, this is the chart that terrifies you. I know, mega billionaire Musk assures us, all this hardship will only be temporary. To quote him, it necessarily involves some temporary hardship, but it will ensure long-term prosperity. Temporary? For how long? Longer than the bank forbears mortgage payments? Long-term prosperity? Will that come to all the unemployed federal workers because they're now free to become successful entrepreneurs? This is the American billionaire, libertarian, Shark Tank, every incipient entrepreneur for him or herself ideology that is utterly clueless about real people and their real conditions of life in capitalism. And that is swallowed whole by many of those real people because they too think that's economic realism. They too think that's all we can afford, because they do not understand the power they have over the production and distribution of money. That's right, power. This is about power. The power over money that the fiat currency system already gives us. Though we have been conditioned to think otherwise, we already have that power over money, not as taxpayers, but as citizens, as members of a political community. We need to become aware of that power and insist that our representatives, who are now paid by the wealthy to use it on their behalf, start using that power for our benefit. No more can't find the money excuses. We have to stop acting like beggars and realize that we don't need billionaires' money to pay for anything. If we depend on billionaires' money, then we depend on having billionaires. If you keep asking for taxes to pay for things, they will tell you that you'll never collect enough taxes to pay for everything you want. And they'll be right. And it doesn't matter. And you have to know that and stop asking. Because we have the power to pay for anything we want. As long as the sources exist, or as long as we can invest in the production of those resources. Not as long as we can collect enough taxes. The purpose of federal taxes is not to pay for government programs. It is to control inequality and inflation and to help achieve other public purposes. This has been known and deliberately obfuscated by tax dollar ideology since a chairman of the New York Fed said in 1946, when the highest marginal tax rates were 94%, and he accepted that. He knew and said what every leftist today must understand. A principal purpose of federal taxes is to attain more equality of wealth and of income than would result from economic forces working alone. What these taxes should be depends on a public policy with respect to the distribution of wealth and income. These taxes should be defended and attacked in terms of their effect on the character of American life, not as revenue measures. The public purpose which is served should never be obscured in a tax program under the mask of raising revenue. We don't need highly progressive taxes on the rich to pay for social programs. We need high taxes on them because they are too rich. Because gross inequality of wealth means gross inequality of political power, which corrupts social life and undermines democracy. Let's have that discussion based on the real purpose of taxation. There's no better exemplar of this than Elon Musk, who has obtained immense power over our lives for no other reason than that he is immensely wealthy. It's not that we need any of his excess money to pay for anything. It's that we cannot allow him to have that much wealth, that much of the public money we created, and therefore that much power. Indeed, a more correct and infinitely more popular position, based on understanding the true purpose of taxes, is to explain that most people pay too much tax. And income taxes should be eliminated for most working people, whose incomes do not exacerbate inequality. We have, and must recognize that we have, a fiscal system that does not depend on billionaires or workers' taxes. We need an economic system that prevents billionaires and a political system that billionaires cannot buy. That is, we need an actual democracy. Understanding all this correctly will become particularly relevant for the left if Trump follows through on some of his promises that will be very popular. If he ends taxation, that is, a reduction of Social Security payments, that will be a very popular and very good thing, and it will cost the government exactly nothing. If, as he suggested he might do in his last term, he permanently ends the FICA tax deductions from workers' paychecks, that will also be a very popular and also a good thing. And the leftists and progressives who insist that would undermine Social Security are wrong. We'll pay a terrible political price and will again help Trump for no reason. Despite the trust fund fictions, those FICA taxes, as FDR himself said, are, quote, straight politics, end quote, and they do not pay for the programs. Leftists should embrace the elimination of payroll taxes and use it to argue for a thorough understanding that taxes do not fund government programs. See my linked article below on payroll taxes are the Achilles heel of Social Security. Capping interest rates at 10%, even temporarily, as Trump has proposed, will also be tremendously popular and make an enormous amount of difference in people's lives, more than raising taxes on the rich. The only reaction of the left to that should be, why not do that permanently? Why hasn't that been done before? Why has it not even been part of the conversation? Usury destroys societies and should be illegal. Leftists should congratulate Trump for this and use it to argue for permanent interest caps and for public banking that would provide loans and credit at very little interest. Trump's idea of exempting tips from taxation, on the other hand, will be popular, but has problems. There will suddenly be a lot of non-taxable six-figure payments that are called gratuities. If leftists are going to effectively resist the Musk austerity onslaught, we have to target and demolish its foundational premise that the federal government finance is like an individual or like a household or like a business, that taxes pay for government programs, and that the national debt will bankrupt us. We have to understand and insist on using the power we already have over the production and the distribution of money. That means abandoning all talk of taxpayer money and taxpayer dollars and all arguments about how much spending to cut or taxes to raise to balance the budget or pay our bills. Maybe a little reluctant to do this, but to understand how wrong and stupid the like an individual or like a household framework is, it may help to make a more correct version of the household analogy, a reverse version of it, if you will. If you were the head of a household who could create money and you issued money to the members of your family to ensure that everyone could get food, housing, medical care, and education, have a decent life, would you care if they didn't pay you back every cent? Would that deficit cause some kind of crisis in the family? No, it would not. If you wanted to put an addition on the house, would you have to go to one of the siblings who ended up with a lot more money than the others and beg him or her to give you some of that money to pay for it? No, you would not. If you could create money at will, would you at any point, under any circumstances, have to go to a neighbor who had ended up, maybe by selling your children something, who had ended up with some of the money that you had created and spent into the family, and say to them, please, sir, let me hold for a while some of that money I created last week, and I'll create some more for you later? No, you would not. Now, if one of the siblings had by some means ended up with 80% of the money you had created and spent into the family and was using it to control family life for his benefit, you might want to demand some of that money back, not to give it back to other family members, since, as the money creator, you always retain the ability to give them as much money as they need, but in order to curtail his overbearing power and end the ruination of family life that caused. It's a very imprecise analogy because in a democratic polity, the head of the household is the household. But I hope you see the point. We are, notionally at least, and must become effectively, the head of the democratic polity. Our position and rights within the fiscal system do not derive from being taxpayers, which would imply that those who pay more taxes have a prima facie claim to more rights over their money, but from being citizens. As members of a democratic political community with a fiat money system, we have power over the production and distribution of our money. What we have to do, the problem we cannot avoid, that problem on which we should focus our attention, is not where to find the money. It's to make sure that we understand how the monetary system works. We understand the power it gives us to produce money, and to make sure that the political system is really democratic enough to let us exercise that power for the social purposes we decide. I hope you see how important it is to get this right and not to avoid explaining it. Please, I beg, I'm taking the position of a beggar. I'm begging my friends on the left to promote a correct understanding of how our fiat monetary system works. Stop arguing within the like an individual or household or business paradigm. The federal government is none of these things and should not be run as if it is. And we have to say that explicitly whenever such a suggestion is made. Stop talking like a beggar. We don't need the rich to pay for anything, and we have to say that whenever it's suggested we do. Again, if you keep asking for taxes to pay for things, they will tell you that you'll never collect enough taxes to pay for everything you want, and they will be right, and it doesn't matter. And you have to know that and stop asking, because we have the power to pay for anything we want. So I'll say again, if we continue to use the terms taxpayer money and taxpayer dollars, we will lose to the Musk austerity agenda without an effective fight. And it's going to be bad. What is coming down this pike is going to be devastating for millions of people and for the economy as a whole. So please take a look at some of the things I've written about this linked below, and some of the resources I've linked below. And let us get ourselves on the right road with a correct understanding and an effective argument about what is possible within the monetary system we actually have. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can find my videos on YouTube and Rumble. You can find all my articles as well as my videos on my Substack. And you can follow me on Twitter. Links are below. See you next time.